if you're talking with a fan and they ask about some detail of the book that you wrote like, 6 years ago and can't remember, like that's the thing that, because if somebody's read a book, it's really fresh for them. And then, well, what about this? Or, hey, what were you thinking when you did this? And, well, let
I
me,
was thinking I was writing a book.
yeah, like that came from my subconscious somewhere.
Troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. Reaction in the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Told stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest.
Today, we are responding to a listener question that came in through Discord. And if you're not on the Discord, please come check it out. The link is down below if you're on YouTube, or in the notes if you're on whatever podcasting app you might be listening to. But our listener and all around cool person, Burn Enough, I don't
Super
know their actual
fan.
name, super fan, who has also been making some really neat sort of paraphrasing videos. I don't know what you would call, I guess, remixes
Clips.
of the shows.
Clips.
Yeah, clips. Just really cool. They also have a channel, so you should check that out, but they're posted in the Discord.
I think he should record videos of himself watching our video and reacting
Right.
to it.
Ah,
That'd be the
So
best.
there you go.
yeah.
Where they just make like a face the whole time. Like that's what we kind of need. Like, what?
Yeah. What are they talking
What are
about?
they talking about? Just shake their head like in a sort of a condescending way. Just do that. All right. So the
See that,
question,
that right here, this guy doesn't know anything. He just doesn't know what he's talking about.
I know.
He
So
did say though that the only two podcasts he listens to are ours and Joe Rogan. So
I
I
know.
think that puts us in a really good
Oh, is
category.
that what that was? Okay.
Yeah.
If we could have that kind of audience,
I know, right?
I could
We're
give
in the
up writing.
stratosphere.
One can hope.
Yep.
One can hope.
I know. Well, we'll just piggyback. We'll get there.
Why would you give up writing?
Well, for a living. Then I could write that epic fantasy I always wanted to write.
It's true.
Someday Rick will have his epic fantasy.
Mhm.
Okay, so the question is, would you discuss how you like to interact with fans? What are your thoughts about military sci-fi fans? Are they mostly older people, or do you notice a younger audience as well? So this
The
question,
answer is no.
this one cracked me up. Are you annoyed if you get recognized in public, which probably affects Jeff more than any of us because of his gargantuan tallness? I can't say that.
Jeff was wandering through the woods and people started taking videos
Yep.
saying they see Bigfoot.
It's a very specific area where one of us might get recognized in public. Let's see. Do you receive a lot of love or hate mail? Let's see. Do you enjoy any fan projects about your books? Yes, we do. And let's see. Do you read all of your Amazon or Goodreads reviews? And do you engage with fans in Discord and other social websites? So in general, I think, how do we feel about interaction? I think the question about reviews is one we could definitely dig into because we love to complain about reviews. So why don't we start
Well,
with,
let's take them from the top one at a time. What was the first one?
okay, so the first one, what are your thoughts about military sci-fi fans? Are they mostly older people or do you notice a young audience as
They're
well?
mostly middle-aged.
And it
white-
really kind of determine the determining factor is who do you consider old? Because when I was a kid, I thought my dad was old when he turned 40, and now that's definitely not the case. So it's interesting because I read Mil Sci-Fi when I was younger, like in my 20s. But I knew a lot of guys in my 20s that were in their 40s and 50s that read it. And so now those guys are older. But we have a lot of younger fans now. So I don't know that there's like an actual like set in stone demographic because the veteran community is just so wide
Right.
ranging in ages.
I mean, generally speaking, especially when you're talking about Amazon, most of your audience is going to be in their mid to late 20s anyways. Not most of your audience. Your audience is going to start in their mid to late 20s. When you're a kid, you read because you have access to a library. You're not buying your own stuff. So, and then when you get out of the house, you get into college, you either don't have time to read or you don't have the money to read. And so it's when people start settling into their life is when they start reading again. And a lot of people pick reading back up when they're 30s. So generally speaking, yeah. And I think middle sci-fi skews a little older anyways, just because of a lot of the people who read it were in the military.
Right.
Right.
All I know is that the demographics that I saw in research back when I did more research and didn't have publishers was white men in their 50s were the major readers of my stuff. And Josh, I question if you can call yourself a mill sci-fi fan because you've never read Starship Troopers.
That's the rules, Josh. We don't make them.
Yeah.
It's just the rules.
That's going to be
Today-
an ongoing
Today could
meme,
be
I
the
think,
day.
in our
Until you read it, yeah.
yeah.
It's not that long of a book, really.
I think there's some
Only
dynamics
7
happening
hours on audio.
too, because if you look at like a lot of like the publishers that we work with currently are very active on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited, and there's a certain demographic that is very prevalent on Kindle Unlimited, like a lot of folks that are older that have fixed incomes. Like Kindle Unlimited is a great resource for them because it's basically a library of all you can eat books for whatever it is now, $12 a month. So that tends to skew things. But for me, when I think about my audience, like, yeah, I try to imagine that like I would want something that is interesting and exciting to even, a private E1, E2. Like would love to teach them something about like what I hope the military could be in a lot of ways, something that's exciting. And then also those people that like I always sort of imagine the person like sitting in the break room at Target where I spent some time. But like just reading on their phone, trying to relax. And maybe that's a person that wanted to join the military and couldn't, for whatever reason. And so that's kind of a person that I imagine. Like I want them to, um, have a great story they can read to take them out of their life for a little bit. But yeah, I think like Rick's even speaking of demographics, like a lot of that would come from Facebook. And so Facebook skews older as well, but it is one of the best places to get real demographics about who readers are. So it's hard. I mean, I even think about, okay, the people that I think of that have experience from Iraqi freedom and global war and terror, like I did, like even the younger people that went through that are already getting old. So now people are
Right.
talking about,
And it's not
they're,
like we ask people when we get emails like, hey, could you tell
yeah,
me how old you are and if you're a man or a woman?
right.
Oh, maybe
Right.
we should do that.
I mean,
It's
I
not
do love
creepy at
Jeff's
all.
question about whenever I meet a veteran or talk to somebody who reads, like, what did you do? What was your job? Like, what's something nobody else would know about your job? And so you kind of get an idea. Although it does tend to be, older white guys that are wearing the hats with their unit on it or whatever. So it's
Well,
kind
You know
most
what's
people,
interesting is that I don't know if you guys have seen this either, but talking about like vets with the hats, I very rarely see like vets from the first Iraq War wearing hats. It's always Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then all the newer guys that are GWAT guys don't do that. But you can tell who they are just
Right.
because of they've got the American flag on their shirt or whatever. I wonder if that hat thing went out of trend or whatever.
no, it's an older thing. It's an older
Yeah.
thing. It's whenever you see someone wearing a hat, they're almost always 60 plus,
Sure.
and for the younger guys, it's grunt style shirts, right? We
Yeah.
all wear grunt style shirts. We all wear what's that other brand that puts American flags on their shirts? We wear American flags and we have stickers on our trucks, and it's not hard to spot.
I have
A
disabled
GWAT
vet
veteran.
plates, so can't hide that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for
but
a
I
long
think
time,
I think when they're 60 or 70, you'll see them wearing those hats.
yeah. For a
Maybe
long
I
time,
should
I
get
didn't.
one just to restart the trend.
Hmm.
I mean, it's weird because there's just something about it that, we don't know if Burn Enough was in the military or not, but it's just you just kind of see it. Like you see that a person was in the military. Like oftentimes you just ask, like, hey, I don't know what it is, like either a stiffness or, I mean, my wife was kidding me the other day. She's like, you don't walk, you march. I'm like, "Oh, I don't mean to do that. I can't help it sometimes. It's just like the way you move through the world, is changed by being in the military. Um, but yeah, when it comes to the audience, I'm actually always excited to meet people that have that aren't what I expect, Um, so I really hope
I don't walk, I range walk.
I range. Well, that's a thing, man. Like, why are you walking so slow? Hurry up. You know, why are you
I met
swinging, why are you swinging
when
your arms like
Josh
a
and I were
donut?
selling books at Dragon Con the year before last. there was a young woman who came up and she was looking at books and her boyfriend was there and he was buying all the lit RPG books. And I asked her, I was like, do you read Bill sci-fi? She's like, I don't like the military. And so I said, well, did you like Lord of the Rings? And she's like, oh, I love Lord of the Rings. And I told her, I was like, well, have you ever seen the behind the scenes stuff where they talk about how they all have the tattoos and they're all friends for life now and they still meet each other? And she's like, oh yeah, that's so great. I was like, that's military sci-fi in a nutshell, is camaraderie, and she got this look on her face like I never thought of that before. I thought it was just people shooting people and loving the military, and one loving war. And I'm like, I've never met anybody who fought in a war who loved war, but um, there's a difference
And
between
most,
love and
most
war.
people that are in the military will never tell you they love the military.
Yeah, there's a difference between loving what you do and loving the state of war. I mean, but anyways, I thought that was pretty interesting. Most of the people I've met who were fans, I've only actually met a couple of fans in person, and but most of them are pretty cool and they're nice. I get a lot of emails though. I do get a lot of emails. What's the next question, James?
All right. The next question is,
I didn't get to answer it.
are you annoyed when you get recognized in public and someone asks you for a photo?
Hell no.
Oh, no way.
I didn't
We're
even
not that
answer
level.
the
We're
question.
not at that level of fame, I
Well,
think.
I'm thinking about at the Emerald Con that we were at, Jeff, where the fan came up to you and had they'd made a framed poster out of all the covers from your superhero series from Wraith, right? And
I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's right over there in the corner.
yeah, I mean, it was
Nice.
just the coolest. It was very cool.
Yeah, it was. It was no, hell no, yeah. It's a tad bit embarrassing just because someone's like heaping praise upon you. But I imagine if I was like couldn't leave the house rock star famous without people following me in cars with telephoto lenses, I'd probably hate that. But we're authors. And if you ever watch the TV show Castle, in the very first episode, he's in this bar, there's a party going, and girls are coming up and going, oh, sign my chest. And yeah, that never happens.
Doesn't
That's
happen.
not a thing for
I mean,
any author
Rick has
ever.
to chase a lot of people off. Like a lot of those 50-year-old white guys want him to sign
Yeah.
their
Yeah, buddy.
That is not a thing for any author ever.
I
No,
mean, that's the thing. Unless you're like George Martin, right? Like no one knows who the authors are. Like even like the big name authors that are right now, unless you follow them in their genre, you wouldn't know them. Like I know
Yeah.
people that don't know who Brandon Sanderson is. I know people that don't know who Mark Greaney or any of these guys that are New York Times bestsellers, and they're huge names in their fields.
They're
But
big
if you don't
names in their
follow
field,
that
but they're
book,
not household names.
No.
There's only
yeah,
the
for
only author
sure.
I can really think of. The only two authors I can really think of that like if I met somebody who had never heard their names, I'd be shocked, and that's Stephen King and J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
And
And George Martin. I think those
Well,
three.
George Martin has the hat, so he's done a good job of like branding himself that way. So I think you see somebody
Yeah.
anymore with a Greek fisherman's cap, and you kind of think George Martin.
the
But
reason I say Stephen King and J.K. Rowling is J.K. transcended fantasy with Harry Potter,
yeah,
right? So like
Sure.
people who read Harry Potter who never read anything else, and Stephen King just because he's been around so long and he's written so many books and so many movies have been
Right.
made out of his stuff.
Right.
I think while George Martin is bigger in his genre, I think you'll find he's a lot like Brandon Sanderson where everybody's not going to know who he is. Like I said, I would be shocked if you ran into anybody over the age of 18 who didn't know who J.K. Rowling and Stephen King were, at least peripherally. I don't
True.
think you can say the same about George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
also
I mean,
about
now
context.
I think maybe even now, I think maybe a couple of years ago when Game of Thrones was still kind of the thing, that probably wouldn't be the case. But I could see like making the way you make your argument. I could agree with you that overall, probably those are the only two.
And the longer he goes without releasing that last book, the worse it's going to get.
I know.
Yeah.
He doesn't go out.
I've met a
In my
couple of
entire
fans.
career has spanned in the distance between his last book and now.
Right. I've met a couple of fans and it was really cool to meet them. I don't know that I've never done like a signing where people were like waiting to have me sign a book, but I
that'd
have
be
had
cool.
several people, see me at Dragon Con or whatever. I'm like, hey, I read this book. Actually, cool thing that happened to me this year is that had a couple of guys that had been to Dragon Con last year and got my book last year, and they had come again, and they came up and said that they really liked it and enjoyed it, and bought another one of my books, and that was cool. But just walking down the street, nobody knows who I am anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I kind of like it that way. I like kind of being the shadow and kind of doing my own thing and not having to work.
Be the gray
You know,
man.
there's kind of a curse with being famous and not being able to go anywhere and do anything, and everybody's got eyes on you, and if you make a silly mistake or you do something dumb, then that can follow you around. And I like the quasi anonymity. I mean, the only people that really know me are the authors in our circles, right? Like I don't have like reader fans, but I have a lot of author friends, and if I go to a conference where there's a lot of authors, people know me and they're excited to see me, and that's great. I love that. I mean, I
I
would love to have lines and lines of readers coming to get signatures and autographs in my book, and that'll probably happen someday. But
you know, with the whole walking down the street, people recognizing thing comes also just an enormous amount of money.
right,
I'll take that part. I don't think
right.
most authors, 99.9% of all authors, though, are never going to have this situation where they're going to be walking down the street and people are going to recognize them. I did have
For
an
sure.
odd thing that it was really surreal and I didn't believe it. I didn't believe her, and I probably should have, because she later on proved it. But as you guys know, I write at Chick-fil-A a lot. There's one down the street in South Jordan Mall in or sort of Jordan Landing Mall here in West Jordan, Utah. And so if you want to shoot me, that's where you go. Chick-fil-A, West Jordan, Utah. The she works there and she saw me writing and she's like, "Oh, you're a writer." She's like, "I want to be a writer." And you know me, I'm always happy to help people, encourage them and stuff like that. And she's like, "Well, what do you write?" I'm like, "Oh, I write military sci-fi." And I just happen to have one of my books on me and I showed it to her and she's like, "Well, that looks really familiar." And the next day she came back and she was like, "My dad has all your books. They're on a shelf in his
Nice,
office."
nice.
And I was like, "No, you got me confused with somebody else." But no, it did. She brought him in, I signed him for him and everything, and she gave him back to him, and he was really happy. But
No, that's awesome.
that blew me away because it's like, what are the odds that some random rando would have that their dad would have on my books? It makes sense though because I'm sort of a dad book person. That's sort of my audience.
The only time I've ever been recognized in public in the middle of nowhere was not because I was an author. It was because I was wearing an Athon shirt and I was in a gas station on the freeway in the middle of Kansas and buying like a Coke or something. And the guy looked at my shirt and he was like, "Athon books. I've read some of those books, I think." And he starts lifting off the titles. I'm like, "Yeah, I work for them." And he's like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." And yeah, it's funny.
My chiropractor knows who they are. That was another one, random one. He didn't know who I was, but I wore the Athon shirt when I went in to see my chiropractor. He's like, "Oh, I read Primal Hunter and all these other books."
Oh,
And
nice. Hell yeah.
yeah, and he said that he would happily come to a con that Athon posted and just be like a chiropractor for authors there.
Oh, that's legit.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, if you're talking with a fan and they ask about some detail of the book that you wrote like, 6 years ago and can't remember, like that's the thing that, because if somebody's read a book, it's really fresh for them. And then, well, what about this? Or, hey, what were you thinking when you did this? And like, well, let
I
me,
was thinking I was writing a book.
yeah, like that came from my subconscious somewhere.
Does that happen to you a lot, Rick? Because you have written a lot of books.
Yeah.
You've written
Nope.
twice as many as I have.
I don't believe I've ever randomly run into somebody who read my books. No.
No, I mean like somebody asking you a question about a book you wrote 10 years ago.
Oh, not in person, maybe like via email, but I've got a pretty good memory for the stuff I wrote, so I don't
Yeah.
really
I had a
forget.
buddy of mine ask me at a softball game about the second Valor book, and he had read the first one and he liked it, and he was reading the second one, and he asked me a question about a character, and I stopped and I thought about it, and I go, "I don't even remember that character's name." And I had to like pull up my Dropbox and find the manuscript and figure out where he was at. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's her name. I didn't remember." That was funny.
Actually, I just remembered something that happened to me when I lived in Idaho. I ran into one of Rick's fans.
Yeah,
And
talking about that, yeah.
yeah, there was this
At the
old guy in
Walmart, right?
Costco. And
Oh,
speaking of the
Costco.
hats, he had the hat on, and I started talking to him, and asked me if you like military sci-fi. He's like, yeah, I read a lot of Rick Partlow's books. And I was just like, I know that guy.
It's funny.
Actually,
It's funny. My son, he still has a lot of friends from back when he went to Syria, the National Guard, and one of his best friends read all my books without realizing that he was related to me.
Nice.
it's funny.
I
And I
have
actually found a post on Reddit from that guy that I met in Costco. And
yeah.
he was, yeah, I met Jeff Haskell. And we talked about Rick Partlow, who's a great author. And he was just Jeff was just a real nice guy. And I was like, oh, hey, the dude remembered me. That's great.
A guy I worked with had read my books and didn't like another guy I was talking to about doing it. I try not to talk about it at work that much, but so he's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, James writes," and then he was randomly talking to another guy that he knew like science fiction. She's like, "Oh, do you know James writes science fiction?" And it turned out that guy had read all my books and didn't even know that we worked for the um,
Ah,
same
That's
place,
funny.
which was kind of
nice.
cool. And then he started asking me a bunch of detailed questions about how, like, we were complaining about hard sci-fi a little earlier before we started, and this guy was a full-on like, explain to me how your ship drives work, and what's your fuel source, and how are you managing? I was like, well, that's I was trying to remember everything I had put in that, that particular book.
I've always wanted to do like a technical manual,
Hmm.
but I'm so busy writing the actual books. Doing it like that just is so much work.
Yeah. Okay, next question, which kind of Rick was alluding to this, but do you receive a lot of love or hate mail?
Not directly. I mean, and this kind of tags into reviews as well. I don't. I've received over the years a number of emails from fans, both critical and uh, congratulatory or complimentary emails. But I don't. I don't have a website anymore, and I don't think my email is listed in the book, so I don't get a lot of fan email. Um, but I do look at the reviews occasionally. I don't read all of them, and I don't ever respond to them. Um, but I love getting reviews. I love getting the both kinds. I love getting the good ones and the bad ones. And usually I just take the bad ones kind of with a grain of salt, unless there's a trend, and then I kind of like look at that and go, is that something that I can do better, or something that I need to change going forward? But I love getting reviews. It's always awesome to see them come in, because I mean you get a lot of ratings, and now that they've kind of combined the rating slash review system, you get a lot more ratings than you do reviews. But I mean, even the mediocre ones, somebody took time to write them out, and that
Uh,
that's
yeah.
that's cool to me.
I get
Unless
one
they're
or
like
two
completely
emails.
trolling.
Yeah. I get one or two emails a week. Most of them are the congratulate, hey, Mr. Haskell, I discovered your series. I really love it, et cetera, et cetera. And I get a kick out of that. And I always respond as quickly as possible because somebody, not only do they spend their money buying my book, they took time out of their day after reading it, they took time out of their day to email me. So whether they're bashing me or they're praising me, they get a response that says, thank you so much for spending your hard-earned money and time on my books. Because that's just legit. And most of the I would say 70-75% of it is praise. I love your books. When's the next one coming out? Nobody ever asks me questions, which is annoying. I'm always like, oh, I'm happy to talk about my books. But I do occasionally get emails like, all your science is wrong. And when that first happened, I would start writing out emails, replying to them, saying, like, well, here's the NASA paper, here's the physics paper, here's this technology this is based on. And then I ultimately would never send it because it's just petty to argue with people about that kind of thing. So I always just say, thank you so much for reaching out to me. I appreciate you taking the time. I did have a physics teacher reach out to me on Facebook once, though, to tell me that my description of gravity in the solar system was completely off, and that it's the only thing about my books that he couldn't enjoy because every time I talked about gravity, um, the star lanes, he was just like, oh, that doesn't exist. And then I sent him the paper from NASA about gravity manifolds, and I was like, well, talk to NASA, man. It's not my problem. And he was really appreciative of it because he was a physics teacher and he learned something new. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I love it when people email me or contact me on Facebook. Please talk to me. All right, I go to cons so I can get some interaction. Otherwise, I end up being like depressed half the year. So I'm an extrovert. I need people to talk to.
I can't
I
say I've
get
ever
you.
gotten bad emails. Like actually, as I'm thinking about this, I don't be all Pollyanna about it, but they've always, if somebody takes the time to email, they're usually positive. So I guess I look forward to getting my, email telling me I suck at some point. So,
I'll send you one.
What's your email
yeah,
address,
thanks.
Josh, James?
What's that? I know, I know.
What's your email address?
I mean, reviews are another story, but like Josh, I mean, I think we're all at the point now where it's like a review is just, okay, it's a point of data that one person read this and this was their takeaway. And so maybe it's a thing for me to think about, or maybe they just didn't read very carefully and, okay, thanks. But I mean, we're in a weird place where no other writers in history have had to get direct feedback so quickly on things in a venue that also affects the sales of the thing that you're,
Right.
trying to get out there to the public. And so it does suck if you first like during the launch period of a book is kind of a critical time with Amazon. And if you get hit with some bad reviews when you're pretty sure they didn't even have time to read it, that's always like feels and then it'll start evening out as the people that actually read the book start, giving feedback on it and it gets better and better. And it's also been weird now that Amazon is rolling out the AI paraphrasing of reviews because
Yeah.
now you're like, well, wait a second, why is the AI picking up on these words? I don't want those
Right.
words to be at the top describing the book. So it's just weird. Like I can't imagine writers, um, in the past, like I just imagine somebody that was like famously a jerk, like oh shoot, like well, I guess Steinbeck was kind of a jerk. But having to deal with this kind of stuff, like they just lose their mind. Like they wouldn't be able to. The stuff we have to deal with there is so much different than um, anybody ever. So
Yeah, but on the flip,
I was going to say that I have gotten a good amount of emails, but for some reason they kind of tailed off recently,
yeah,
which my books released haven't. So I don't know why, but I used to get a lot more. I don't believe I've ever gotten one that was insulting or overly critical. Uh, those mostly for reviews. People who take the time to email you usually like your stuff.
mhm.
So
I wonder if email is
Even the
just
ones that
falling
have
off.
been like, your science is all wrong, have really enjoyed the books. I've
Mhm.
never gotten an email that was like, you suck, your dog sucks, your rebellion sucks, nothing like that. I've gotten reviews like that, but
yeah,
not,
reviews are different.
that's different. Yeah.
I
I
also feel like
wonder, like when you were saying, James, about the people losing their minds about talking with conflicting fans or whatever. I I can't imagine what it must have been like for writers to get a book published and then not hear anything,
that's
right?
true.
Because they didn't have an Amazon where they
That's
could go and
worse.
see the reviews. They just got the paycheck from their publisher, and that what it came every quarter or whatever it is or whatever, but you're not getting any feedback at all about your book other than the sales. And man, that I don't know how I would have been able to handle that. You know what I
And by
mean?
the
Like,
time your book comes out, you may not even remember writing it.
right,
It'd be like
right.
3 years or 4 years.
100%. Yeah,
I remember talking to Brian Michael Bendis, who's a comic book writer, and he wrote one of the best runs of Avengers ever, in my opinion, called The New Avengers. And I was asking him about it. I was like, you had this amazing run on the Avengers, and then they ruined it with Civil War because you got like 12 issues out, and then Civil War happened. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "The books." He's like, "Oh, the." He's like, "I wrote New Avengers 5 years before they released it, and I wrote Civil War the year they released it. So for me, for him, it was like 5 years separation between the two.
oh wow.
Yeah.
But for the audience, it was one right after the other. So yeah, um, that's pretty interesting. I don't know. I think I'd almost prefer it, but I also know that I never would have gotten published in the old system.
For
Not ever.
sure.
And so there just isn't the publishers, the big five, just aren't interested in military sci-fi, and they haven't been for 20 years.
And you'd be dependent on one or two reviewers that if one decides they don't like you, that
Yeah.
carries a lot more weight. And now the fans can decide they like 50 Shades of Grey and it's got 10 million. positive
Right.
reviews. So
Right.
it's a different world.
Waiting
Though
for
it
the
has some of the funniest negative reviews.
Yeah.
sequel series, 30 Shades of Mauve.
For reviews, though, reviews are really interesting. I've got something like 6,000 reviews on book one for Grimm's War. I think overall the whole series is something like 20 or 30,000 reviews. And I used to read all of them. The ones that hurt the most are the ones that are true, the negative ones. They're like, oh, this person can't write this for crap, and you're like, oh yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm working on it. Those ones hurt. I wish I could say I could read all my reviews and not be affected by them, but I can't. So I usually generally stick to reading the 5-star reviews and glancing at the 1-star reviews. The 3-star reviews where they're like, this book is mediocre. It's probably not your genre, probably not your taste. That's fine. That's totally fine. I have 74% of my reviews are 5-star reviews. So I mean, like I know I've got my audience out there.
You've drilled down into these numbers way too much.
I was just happened to have just been looking at them the other day. But the vast majority of my reviews are 5- and 4-star reviews.
As long as on Amazon, the little 5th star has part of it shaded, I'm okay. I don't need to.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you're 4.4 or higher, you're good to go. And I'm like 4.7, I think, on Amazon and 4.5 on Goodreads. But I've gotten some reviews that were painful. Not because they were personal attacks at me or anything, though I have those. It's just that they saw through what I was doing. And then I've gotten some that are just outright hilarious. Like, to this day, my favorite review is a pair of reviews where, and these came one right after the other. I think it was on book 6, 5 or book 6, where one guy was complaining about how like all my cool characters are women, and this series just turned into like a girl power series and blah blah blah. And then the next guy was like, Haskell's clearly a misogynistic, racist a-hole who's Islamophobic and blah blah blah. Even though one of the main characters is Islamic,
I get the same thing about women. Anytime I have a strong female character, it's always somebody talking about, oh, he's clearly, some liberal girl power type. It's like, and I make sure, there's one thing that bugs me about a lot of fiction is waifu.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Where there's 80 or 90 pound girl that tosses around a 250-pound guy like nothing.
I hate that.
I make sure that like any of the female characters who's actually a badass in a physical fight, it's because they have like, some kind of enhancement like bionics or,
or they trained and they earned it to get there. They
even training though.
But strength. I guess what I'm saying
tactical, not strength training, but tactical training,
right?
Like using the element of surprise and
right.
Yeah, that only takes you so far. But I do have female characters who have like, implants and stuff or bionics that make them much stronger than they look, and that's part of the, it's part of the
fun.
That they're like bait. They people think they're an easy prey, but they, but it's, and yet, other people will. One that really gets me is I wrote a series called Taken to the Stars. No, I'm sorry, not Taken to
This is what?
not Taken to the Stars. Earth at War. Earth at
Oh,
War
yeah.
series. And in this series, the Chinese and the Russians are very clearly bad guys. And at the time, because I started this series in like 2019, I got all kinds of criticism from a few reviewers for being xenophobic and painting the Chinese and Russians in a bad light. And of course, everything that happened since then, it's like
they do it for themselves.
Yeah, I was too gentle with them.
I feel the same way about the Middle East, where I touched on some things that Islam does, and then October 7th happened, and I actually got an email from somebody being like, I called you an Islamophobe, and I'm sorry, I didn't know what their culture was like, kind of thing. So,
well, what's interesting about that kind of review or criticism is that obviously we're all Americans, but we're writing our fiction from our personal perspectives and point of views, and just some things that we've been through, our experiences really. And it just so happens that a lot of times China is an antagonist to the US or US interests, and same as Russia and Korea, North Korea, and different places. But if you were a Chinese person, the Americans would be the antagonists. Or if you were, Russian in some parts of Russia, or at some point in history, America would be the antagonist. So, like, yes, I can see, the criticism as somewhat valid, but at the same time, it's the experience. If you want to read a book about Americans being the bad guy, there's bound to be books out there too. And I don't know, I just think that it's kind of short-sighted for people
It's
to
always
say that. But
hard.
it's also one of the reasons why I typically in my mill sci-fi don't have
Yeah.
current day nation state similarities or analogs as part of my governmental systems. They're all different. And so I have never had a review like that on my science fiction. With my current military thriller, I might get some because I'm using North Koreans as the bad guys, but I'm sure there's a fair amount of North Korean fiction that the Americans are the bad guys too. So
It kind of gets
Probably
to
not to North Koreans.
what's
verisimilitude,
that?
which probably not the North Korean. If you haven't listened to the verisimilitude episode with Richard Fox from last week, you should check that out. But
Hmm.
for me, whenever people make complaints like that, like oftentimes, A, they haven't read the whole book. They are actually treating that group as a monolith as opposed to realizing that individual characters in a culture can be different than others. And there are
Oh, for
aspects
sure.
of it, right? And people don't like, oh, you mentioned that and you didn't uh show the I don't know, it just feels like that kind of gets to some of the other stuff we've talked about with what details people grab onto and what they don't, what expectations they bring, and um
Well,
they
even in current like real time,
Mhm.
at this moment in time, people look at the Russian-Ukraine contract and call the Russians the bad guys, right? Let's just say they are. I know for a fact that there's millions of Russian citizens that are not bad
Right,
people,
right.
right? And so you can have an antagonistic nation state that is the bad guy in those terms and still have good people. It's just the same way in World War II there were good Germans. You
Some
know
of
what I
them were
mean?
Americans.
Yeah, I know. So it's kind of unreasonable when you're attacking an author for using a nation state as an antagonistic force to say, oh well, you just hate those people. And I'm like, well, maybe they're just the antagonist, that entity, but that doesn't mean that all the people are bad. I don't know, I kind of ignore those reviews. Those are just raging
Yeah,
people
no,
that
me
don't
too.
have
I mean,
better
no,
things
Yeah,
to do with their time.
yeah.
I the reviews that are attacking you for your content in such a way that it is there's nothing you can do to change that. It's not
Yeah.
helpful. You can ignore those reviews.
Oh,
Reviews like where like, oh, this book is two dimensional, or oh, this character is really cool. I wish you did more with them. Those are things you listen to.
yeah. To that point, I got a review on Edge of Valor. I can't remember if it was a 1 or 2 or 3 star. Um, but basically, it said the book was fine, but I took issue with the main character questioning this female soldier who had been raped during the mission. And because I had the investigator who was male asking the questions and not his female partner. And had I thought about that a little bit more, which I probably should have, I probably would have had the female character lead the interview and lead the investigation with that particular victim, but I didn't. And so that, I mean, yes, it is a valid point. It doesn't really affect the story as a whole, and she wasn't knocking my
She's
overall.
leveling some legitimate criticism.
For sure. Yeah, and that kind of stuff is it's good for me, just in context of, I don't think that I'm the best writer of all time, and I'm always looking to kind of improve and do different things and just look at it from a critical standpoint rather than I can't believe you didn't like my writing. You must be a horrible person. You know what I mean?
Josh, you are the best writer of all time. I'm just gonna let
Oh,
you know.
thank you. I appreciate that. I have been called the Stephen King of sci-fi.
I don't think you were fishing for a
Because you
compliment.
don't
Call
know how to write
yourself
an
that?
ending. Because you
No,
don't know how
no.
to write an ending.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. I can't remember what 20 books it was. But there was a guy there who was hanging out with Rhett and Steve, and he had told them that he thought at the time that I was the Stephen King of sci-fi. But that was like I had just released all the Terra Nova books, I had just released all the Valor books and the Striker War books, all like in a year. And so I had like launched a crap ton of books. And so he's making an analogy there that I was writing a whole bunch. But we've kind of kept that meme going just because it's funny.
I think we got time for one last question if we make it real quick.
Yes. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of these things, but this is a good one. So, do you enjoy any fan projects about your books, like artwork, Wikipedia pages, or YouTube channels or reviews? And I think we could all use some Wikipedia love if anybody wants to jump on and make some Wikipedia
Yeah.
pages.
There's
Yeah,
no
please
But
do.
Wikipedia page about me.
do you have a Wikipedia page?
I said there ain't no Wikipedia page
I know
about
that's
me.
the thing. You need a what is it, a Wikipedia librarian or something to make one. Um,
The only fan project I've ever seen in my stuff is Burn Enough. The guy who's asking the question.
really?
That video was amazing that he made.
Yeah.
The one
He's
about your
done
world.
a couple of good review videos for Rick.
Yeah.
We're saying he. We don't actually know who Burn Enough
Well,
is.
I mean,
So.
I believe it is a he. I mean, from
Oh,
the
okay.
voice in the videos anyway.
Oh, okay. Yes, you're right. You're right.
The yeah, that video he made was pretty incredible. So one of my fans sent me a hat, which was pretty cool. It had the interceptor shark on it. I should have brought it down if I thought about it. And I get emails a lot with people asking, well, they're not really fans though. They're all like, you want to do an animated series or whatever? And I always send them to Athon and be like, yeah, go talk to Athon. But I think the hat's the only thing I've ever really gotten. And you guys wrote a couple of short stories in my book series in my university. You liked it so much, so that's fan art.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And my daughter, if I force her to or pay her to, she'll do fan art for me. Fan art.
Okay.
But I mean, specifically when it comes to like YouTube channels and reviews, I mean, those things are really, really cool. And we said at the beginning of the show, but if you haven't checked out Burn Enough's channel, it's really nice. He does a really good job kind of putting together some clips from our show. He's done lots of great reviews on Rick's books and his series. I love that kind of stuff.
I love his opening animation for his little compilations. And his links below. And while you're down there, hit the like and subscribe button.
I like how you did that. It was very
Yes.
natural. I liked it.
I'll try to insert some goofy graphics. Where can we get that? Stuff.
If I had more money,
If
I'd
we
just
don't
pay
do it,
to be
Burn
our
will.
I know.
Will he do it enough?
Bye.
All right. I think that's we touched on all the questions, or if we didn't, we touched on them throughout the discussion. So hey, we love to get questions. If you want to send some in, we will definitely discuss them to the best of our ability, depending on what you want to talk about. I don't know. But I'm trying to think of, I was about to make a joke, but so like what would be off limits? I don't know.
Also, if you have like an idea for a guest, you'd like to see somebody on the show,
Yeah.
please let us know. Nothing's off limits, actually, James. Nothing's off limits. Don't limit the audience. We don't have to reply to them. Ask away. Ask any question you want.
Jeff's gardening tips. We got that coming.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. No, we had a great time doing the interview with Richard. So that's something we want to do more of in the future. And we're looking at different ways to do interviews and things like that at events and cons coming
I
up.
actually have a special interview I want to do here in the next month or two with somebody authors will really like, and that is the author of the Snowflake Method.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's gonna be
He has
great.
agreed to come on the show, so we just got to lock down a time.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you for hanging out with us. And if you have not, please join the Discord. The link will be down below. Also, Burn Enough's channel, I'll get in the notes. And if you want to send emails, we love to get email. So, or check us out on the various social medias and whatnot. So, all right. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see y'all later.
Lone out troopers on a hidden jump gate. Military science fiction podcast.